Ladies and gentlemen, it's just gone 6 o'clock. If we can make a start to this Cabinet meeting. Welcome to the meeting, colleagues. Firstly, apologies. Where are any apologies? Okay. Second, there are no late items. Item 3, there are no receipt of petitions. Agenda item number 4, identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply. We do have item 10. Agenda item 5, any declarations of interest? Okay. Next is minutes of the meetings held on 9th December, so if we can just approve those. Right, so page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, anything on 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so Cabinet okay to approve the minutes as a true record of the meeting held. Okay, can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 7, recommendations for corporate scrutiny and governance board, and as I've done before, I'll take them with each agenda item as and when they come up. The first key decision is agenda item number 8, primary authority partnership scheme for trading standards, environmental health and licensing business support. And that's over to Councillor Shanker, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is to introduce the primary authority partnership scheme to support Derby businesses, for which charges will be made on a cost recovery basis. Primary authority will provide the local authority with an effective way to support businesses of all sizes, providing them with greater confidence that they're doing the right things and what is needed to comply with legal requirements. Many other local authorities offer PAP. Introduction by Derby will mean a comparable service is available here in the city to businesses and avoid them looking to other local authorities to provide this. As a unitary authority, Derby can offer a one-stop shop for PAPs, and our initial focus will be on activities covered by the trading standards and food and safety teams. So in summary, it's a welcome paper. PAPs will allow the Council to provide a comprehensive business advice and support service on regulatory matters whilst recovering the costs involved, which is very important given the backdrop of increasing budgetary pressures that we have. Thank you, Chair.
Beg your pardon, sorry, I correct myself. Yeah, the recommendation is the board resolved to support the recommendations to Council Cabinet outlined in the report and support the implement of the scheme with the proviso that this does not result in the overstretching of resources. And I think we can approve that as a recommendation. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations, including that recommendation from Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board. Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. That's approved. So the next is, that's recommendation 4. The next agenda item is outdoor sports and strategy for Derby, and I'll hand over to the Cabinet Member for Communities and City Centre Regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This item is presenting to Cabinet the outdoor sports strategy for Derby for Cabinet's consideration and approval. All local authorities are encouraged by Sport England to undertake an independent assessment and to produce a playing pitch strategy. As always, we're wanting to adhere to good practice and have pulled all that information together. The key reasons for doing this really are around ensuring that we have consistency in terms of our sports provision, that we're planning for the future, that we understand what the needs are in terms of our communities, what the demand is for sports fields and pitches. And also, importantly, it helps us to attract external funding to help us deliver our sports provision. And Chair, I think it's particularly important at the time that we're in terms of the budget, with the cuts that are coming down to us from central government. I think it's really important that we still have a strong ambition for sports strategy and other services that are non-statutory, to make sure that we keep our eye on the goal of having really good provision. And this document, Chair, helps us to be able to achieve that despite all of the financial problems that have been imposed on us by the government, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Orson. Any questions? Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. One's a technical question. Because this affects the whole city, should this not be going to full council for approval? That's a technical question. And the other thing was really to ask the Cabinet member, in the light of subsequent papers where it does say that you are considering withdrawing funding to support pitches, we've got a report here that says that some of our pitches perhaps need extra work doing to them, and that we have a shortage in some areas of pitch provision in some different sports. So can the Cabinet member kind of explain how you're going to square the circle, really? Because we've got one report saying we need to go on investing, another report later on in the agenda saying that you're going to be taking out the money for looking after the pitches.
Yes, that's a very fair question, Councillor Jones, and you're right. There is an inherent tension there because of the cuts that's being made to the council's budget and the move that the road we're being forced down really towards statutory services only. However, the document really sets out how we can work with community groups and volunteers more. The strategy will help us target Section 106 monies from new developments as they come along, to make sure that that's used in the best way, and we're using Section 106 money to provide sports facilities. And also being able to apply for external funding from organisations like the Football Foundation, the National Lottery, all of these external organisations that do have funding available. Having this document in place shows that we've got a clear strategy in place, and we'll support those bids for external funding as we progress them, Chair. I don't know if the monitoring officer might be able to answer the other question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm satisfied that this is a key decision and it's appropriate forum to be debated by Council. However, by Cabinet, sorry, but Cabinet does have the gift of referring this to full Council for noting if it so wishes. So it is appropriate for this report to be considered at this meeting by Cabinet.
Councillor Jones, do you believe it will be helpful to the process, in terms of the decision making, to take it, to full council for noting, then enable further scrutiny and questions?
I think the advantage with taking it to full council is it does give it a higher, with no disrespect to the Cabinet, a higher profile and a bigger airing. Hopefully, most people would be in broad agreement with it. So, but it's obviously it's a matter for Cabinet.
Okay, thank you for that advice. Councillor to be fair, sorry, Councillor Upton, Councillor Holmes had indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Rawson. This 106 monies is going to be increasingly important. One example in Mickletown is the Varsity Grange pitches. If 106 can help to bring in external support and community groups to take ownership and to improve facilities, then obviously it's incredibly important. At the scrutiny last night, there's a recommendation 4 that I hope Cabinet will fully accept and take on board as part of this report. And basically the debate was around the concern, I think that's the right word to use, the 106 monies may be focused on particular areas or particular projects rather than necessarily the ward that the 106 monies directly came from. So a suburb may have some houses and 106 monies won't necessarily go to that particular leisure pitch in that ward. So I would say it's really important to remember, I think it was Councillor Repton who brought a motion, correct me if I'm wrong, to Council on the issue of Alistry getting some money that should have maybe gone to Darley in some way, and 106 is, that was it.
Yeah.
So,
you and the Liberals.
Yeah, and I think Council agreed that, yeah, fair enough, it's a good point, and I think the other way around, the argument would have been the other way around, so that's fair enough. But Council agreed that the principle should be, via a motion, that 106 monies from a local area should be focused on that local area. And that was one of the concerns of the scrutiny, and therefore recommendation 4 is something I think that is very important, not to lose sight of contributing to the local area that provided the 106.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Councillor Repton, please.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the 106 funding. Yeah, I think we need to use the 106 funding as imaginatively as possible. And there will be times when, it rightly so, as I raised, as you reminded me, Councillor Holmes, the time when you and the Liberals in control of the council and you used money that should have gone into Darley for the King George playing fields. And it was right for me to do that as the ward councillor. But there are occasions also where we can't be too parochial, where the monies that we want for a certain project will lever in external funding, and we shouldn't miss those opportunities. So take on board what you're actually saying, but also we can't be too parochial either. The point I want to come to is page 29, and I think certainly in these very straitened times in terms of finances, we should be using wherever possible educational facilities and working with schools wherever possible and appropriate to do so to open them up for the public. And also when we look at the multi-million-pound investment the university have got only a mile up the road, excellent facilities there. I'm sure where we can, we ought to be encouraging the university to open that out as much as possible to the local populace, whether it's Darley or Alistry or the wider city. As I say, it's only a mile from the city centre. But certainly we've got schools all round the city, whether it be in Spondon or Alveston or Bolton, where we ought to be looking at opening them up to the public and working closely with them. And also, as I think Martin mentioned earlier, about community involvement, whether it's the bowling clubs or the cricket clubs, we do need to get them where we can to take more responsibility. And we have had some successes in that, where the clubs and individuals have benefited from that. So I welcome the paper, I welcome the challenge. There are opportunities there, the 106, community use of educational facilities, talking to the university to try to make sure that we meet the people's sporting needs. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? I think we got, the youth mayor, please.
I'd just like to note and ask about, in the supporting information point 4.11, it says that when this went to the Regeneration and Culture Review and Scrutiny Board, one of the recommendations seems to be the inclusion of provision for minority sports. And I was just wondering if any steps had been taken since it was taken to that board to boost the inclusion of provision for minority sports within the document.
Okay, thank you. Just to come back on some of those points, Councillor Holmes, first of all. In terms of the Section 106, there are, as you'll know, very clear rules about how Section 106 funding can be spent legally. And one of the conditions of Section 106 is that it offsets the impact of the development that's provided the Section 106 funding. So that sort of dictates the area in which the funding can be spent. I think it's not quite so clear-cut as restricting it to a particular ward. If a development's on one side of the road and there's another ward on the other, I think we need to be flexible enough to take that into account, and I'm sure you'd agree with that, Councillor Holmes. So I think the other point to make as well is, of course, we do need to take account of need, and there's not much point in providing two football pitches next to each other. There's got to be an element of common sense really when taking that into account. But I think the general point you make is well made. And Councillor Repton as well, yes, absolutely. We need to be working with as many community partners as possible, and in terms of working with schools in particular, schools have got a great resource that are used during the daytime, perhaps not used as much as they could be in the evening. So it's going to become even more important for us to work with schools to open up those facilities. And Mr. Youth Mayor, good evening. Just to respond to your point, absolutely. The document does sort of focus on, I guess, the sports with the highest amount of participation, but that doesn't mean we should forget the minority sports, and they're still really important to a lot of people in the city, and we need to make sure that we can support those where we can as well. I don't know if officers have got any more detail on the minority sports that they may like to contribute. Duncan.
Yes, just to add that the scope of the report is quite tight in that it follows planning policy and Sport England guidance and focuses on 9 sports, obviously some of the biggest participation sports, football, cricket, hockey, rugby, but it also addresses demand for some minority sports, Gaelic football, netball, tennis bowls. So the analysis for the report does assess the demand for those sports, and obviously there isn't that much demand, but we do provide, even for Gaelic football, there is a pitch at the racecourse. And beyond the outdoor sports strategy, which focuses on those sports in particular, we are increasingly focused on minority sports and outdoor adventurous sports. So it could be wheel sports, but we're also looking at getting other like the high ropes course as an example at Markeaton Park, foot golf at Markeaton Park. We're increasingly looking at other less high profile activities that we can encourage participation in.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holmes.
On the recommendation 4, I would hope that Cabinet can accept that fully. In terms of all administrations over the last decade or so that I can remember, for some reason struggled with the 106 liaison with ward councillors. It always seems to be an issue, no matter how we seem to try and tackle it. And I think if recommendation 4 was fully accepted by Cabinet tonight, then it would go some way to enabling us as ward councillors to have that liaison and have that engagement as we move forward with this issue.
Yes, I think that's right, Councillor Holmes. It's a really important role of ward councillors to be able to have that input and to be able to feed in, knowing the communities as as a ward councillor, you know the needs of the community. So it's really helpful to be able to feed that information in.
Okay, thank you. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations are set out in the report to include the recommendation from the Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board. And I'll read that out. The Board resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that the process of consulting with the listening to the views of ward councillors and the allocation and the use of 106 funds for green, open space and recreation outdoor sports to be improved and communicated to all members. So Cabinet to approve the recommendations, including recommendation from the Governance Board. Okay, show of hands please, thank you. It's approved. The final couple of reports are from me. The next one is item 10, change to the council tax support scheme from 1st of April 2016. The local council tax support scheme was introduced in April 2013 following the abolition of the National Council Tax Benefit Scheme. The scheme affects those of working age only. The council scheme has remained the same since its introduction, other than for annual inflationary increases. To change the scheme for 2016-17, we undertook a public consultation which started on 16 October last year. We wrote to all 12,624 of the existing CTS households and received 130 responses. The consultation consisted of 6 proposals. Respondents to the consultation were more heavily in agreement with the first 4 proposals. These feature in the proposed scheme. The 5th proposal reduced the period of backdating claims from 6 months to 1 month. This was more heavily opposed. The scheme proposal has been amended to backdating claims to a 3-month period. The final proposal reduced the savings limit against which CTS would apply from £6,000 to either £3,000 or £1,000. This proposal was significantly opposed. The proposal has been withdrawn from the proposed scheme, maintaining the savings limit at £6,000. Recommendations are set out at paragraphs 2.1 to 2.6. So any questions on any of that? Yes, the youth mayor, please.
Sorry. In the alternative suggestions from the consultation, one of the alternative suggestions was that the council could make savings by improving the way we communicate about council tax support and other benefits, cutting down on postage and having more online forums and forms. And I was just wondering if that alternative suggestion had been looked into at all.
I'll ask that question of the Director of Finance, please.
Yes,
Martin.
Chair, in relation to e-forms and cutting down on postage and everything, we obviously look at that and we will continue to do that. Things online are something which we prefer, something which is more efficient for the council, and if that benefits the claimants as well, then that is something we certainly look to do in all of these cases.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so Cabinet to approve the recommendations are set out in the report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Well, by the way, there were no recommendations from the Scrutiny and Governance Board, but they have resolved to support the recommendations to Council Cabinet. Agenda item number 11, the Council Tax Base. The proposed Council Tax Base for 2016-17 is 65,138.2 Band D equivalent properties. This is an increase on the current tax base due to anticipated higher collection rates, a reduction in the level of council tax support awarded, and an estimated increase in the number of future properties in Derby. This has a positive effect on the 2016-17 budget, which is incorporated in the Revenue Budget Report. Recommendations are set out at paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2. Any questions or contributions from anybody on that? Okay, before I put that to Cabinet, there are no recommendations on the Scrutiny and Governance Board other than the Board resolved to support the recommendations to Council Cabinet as outlined in the report. So can I have a show of hands from Cabinet, please, to approve the recommendations as set out in the report? Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 12 is the capital budget for 2016-17 to 2018-19. The proposed capital programme for the next 3 years is £195.5 million. The scheme totals for each strategy area are set out in the report with the details in the appendices. We have received the programme to reflect the removal of some ICT schemes which will now be dealt with from revenue funding. This has resulted in a reduction to our borrowing costs, which are reflected in the revenue budget report. Our minor technical changes have been incorporated in the final proposed budget. The report also outlines the rules and boundaries against which borrowing will be undertaken by the Director of Finance and for the repayment of debt. Recommendations are set out at paragraphs 2.1 to 2.8. The report needs to be amended to add the additional wording before the recommendations. To recommend to Council the following. Any questions? Does the Director of Finance want to come in on any aspect of that?
Just to clarify that last bit, Chair, the additional word in the recommendations, it says to approve and to note in each of these, but just to reflect that Council take this into consideration, so that's for adding the words to recommend to Council the following, and then recommendations 2.1 through to 2.8.
Thank you. Councillor Rex.
Just to very quickly make reference to the first item of expenditure, the Environment Agency, the £30 million on flood defences. I'm pleased to say that they've started primarily in mine and Councillor Eldritt's ward. The work has started a few weeks ago, and hopefully the work that takes place will help prevent not only Darley but this city avoid the worst effects that we've seen in Cumbria, in Leeds, in York and the north of the country. So that's to be very welcome, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, contributions from anyone? So Cabinet to approve the recommendations are set out in item 12 of the capital budget report. Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. And just again on that scrutiny and governance board, there were no recommendations, but they resolved to support the recommendations in the report. Agenda item number 13. For that, I'll hand over to the Director of Finance to brief Cabinet on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out my opinion on the estimates taken into consideration in setting the budget and the level of reserves set aside. My opinion is that the estimates are robust, having undertaken a significant amount of work and challenge in the budget process, and the reserves held are adequate. I can inform Cabinet that the general reserve has been maintained, the budget risk reserve has been calculated and is appropriately funded. A reserve to smooth the impact of budget funding reductions of 10.1 million has been set aside. A delivering differently reserve of 5 million has been created to deliver the budget savings over the next 3 years, and that an ICT reserve has been set aside to account for the changes in the capital programme previously noted. Recommendations are at 2.1 to 2.4. Noting that this report is to be considered by Council when they consider the revenue and capital budgets on the 3rd of February.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Any questions, contributions from anyone on that? Okay, again, the Scrutiny and Governance Board made no recommendations, but they've endorsed the recommendations as set out in the report. So, Cabinet, show of hands, please, to approve the recommendations. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 14 is the General Fund Revenue Budget for 2016-17 to 2018-19. You will see from the report that we have proposed a detailed and balanced 3-year budget. This is something which has not been done for some years and is a huge step forward in managing our financial strategy. The budget position requires £45 million of savings over the next 3 years, with £10.1 million of reserves being used in the first 2 years to smooth the savings requirement and support the MTFP, allowing us time to plan for 2018-19 more effectively. Council tax is proposed to be increased by 3.99% each year to include the social care precept of 2%. This will go towards, but not fully cover, the rising costs of social care. We consulted on our proposals during December and January with the public and a variety of groups. The results are set out in Appendix 11. Given the severity of our financial position, with cuts to our government funding and pressures on our budgets, we have only been able to make minimal changes to the proposals. The changes proposed defer the savings on Beeline, CCTV and Derby Advice until 2017-18 whilst we develop further plans. These are highlighted in paragraph 10.4. A number of other changes have been applied to the budget since consultation to take account of the implications of the autumn statement and the provisional financial settlement which was announced on 17th of December last year. These are detailed in paragraph 10.5. The proposals in this report are recommended to Council for discussion at the meeting on 3rd of February. The recommendations are set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.15. Councillor Repton, please.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. I've got a couple of points I want to make. There is significant uncertainty around the 2017-2018 and 2018-2019 levels of government funding, particularly around better care funding. And further clarification is needed to understand the impact and potential new burdens associated with this funding. Therefore, the MTFP includes a new pressure alongside this funding until more information surrounding the implications of this are received. In terms of the Osborne tax, as it is known throughout the country now, the 2%, in this city that will raise approximately £1.5 million towards the spiralling costs that we have in making sure the most vulnerable in our city are given the help and support they and their families desperately need. Yet that actual estimated need is 3 times that. It's £4.5 million. £4.5 million. In this city that will leave a gap of some £3 million. And I think as the public start to understand, when we're forced to try and protect public services the most vulnerable in this city, the real scale of the challenge we have simply to do that. And that gap between that 2% and the reality, and it's the reality faced by many cities in the Midlands and in the North. Because what you have in the South, where you have far more higher bands raising more council tax, for instance, Westminster, will bring in tens of millions of pounds in terms of helping them meet their care needs. But it's a transfer from the rich to the poor, the North to the South. Many councils in the North and in the Midlands, like ourselves, will struggle to meet the care needs of the most vulnerable in our city. And I thought it was important for me to spell out to Cabinet the fact that that new Osborne tax of 2% will only raise 1.5 million. That's to be welcome, but the real need is 4.5 and rising. And that really focuses us in some of the very, very difficult decisions that we have to actually make in this council chamber. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items. I don't want to rehearse the budget debate at this stage, but I welcome the deferral of the on CCTV. I think the awful events today, I think you'll echo these comments, hopefully will justify the use of CCTV. I hope that there's going to be some movement and it can help the police in finding who's responsible for what happened today. CCTV clearly is very important. On terms of page 7, the council tax increases, new homes bonus grant, and also 5.3 business rates collected. I think we talk about the gearing effect, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I really think the council needs to aggressively pursue boundary review now in terms of expanding the city. In my opinion, we need to start looking towards an economic boundary for the city rather than its current footprint. And I think that's something that would certainly help revenue in those areas greatly if we were to pursue that. One item on page 25, which I'm just seeking clarification on, it was mentioned and discussed in scrutiny last night. It's permanent costs of implementing job evaluation. Could I ask the officer to just clarify the breakdown? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said that some of these costs were for the pay increases of senior staff, but I'm not quite sure. I'm just seeking clarification on that, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. These are for the change in the pay costs across the council. It's not for senior staff. Senior staff from director upwards aren't involved or aren't included in the pay and reward project. These are for costs of staff up to head of service level, and they are for permanent increases in the pay bill.
Youth Mayor, please. Thank you.
Could I just say I'm very glad to see that the sorry to bring this up again, but the B line has been deferred for a year, and I know that will make a very large impact on many young people who struggle to get to school. And in the consultation document done at Derby Moor, I was very interested to find that only 4% of students agreed with that proposal, and 52% thought it would mean students wouldn't be able to travel in the way they're currently doing. I'm just wondering, it says that it will be deferred a year whilst we develop our future plans, and I'm just wondering if any guidance could be given into what that possibly means.
Yeah, I mean, the services we are able to defer is about buying time. I mean, if a week's a long time in politics, you know, several months gives us a bit more time to look at alternatives, because we come back to this point again, we are shutting down services or reducing services that this administration absolutely believes in. You know, they're absolutely vital. It's not a moral debate about that. You know, if you go to some Tory councils, or most Tory councils, it is literally that. You know, these are services which they feel that have no place in modern society. They're almost present a business case. Yeah. The tragedy of it is we are having, especially as Labour councillors that believe in public service, are having to cut services that, many of us have built up. I mean, some of the services where you look at neighbourhood management, for example, sadly, some of those staff are going to be affected. We're going to try to mitigate that. Well, neighbourhood management was something I introduced. I worked very hard and it's made a massive difference to all our communities. The reality is we had to prioritise, between protecting the most vulnerable in our society. We had a really important briefing from the Director of Children's and Young People Services about the important work Safeguarding is doing, our Cabinet member, Councillor Bolton. We don't hear about that work. The fact is, the amount of intervention we're doing in the city now to support young people who are hit by government cuts. They live in very disadvantaged communities. They live very, very complicated family lives. They've got all sorts of challenges they're facing in their households, and the reality is that's impacting on children. It means there's more pressure on vulnerable families, and the reality is children are suffering. So this council pleased to say we've invested in resources on skilled social workers to be able to identify those families and put in place early intervention plans. And very importantly, the effects of that are actually working very well, because it means, in spite of having to implement more intervention plans, the number of children in care is actually remaining quite stable. So it's saying we're not having to pick up the pieces, because suddenly at the last stage, we are able to get in and identify. That's a very important area. That means we've got an excellent team of officers overseeing that important area, but very importantly, we've got good people on the front line, excellent social workers under difficult circumstances. So, that's the effect of government cuts. And it is disappointing, because this is ideologically driven. The Tories, you don't hear that from the Tories, and their campaigns are about helping people collect their garden rubbish. That's the biggest important thing they think. They've spent 3 years campaigning on that. They're not talking about that now, because even they would look completely stupid, on that daft argument. I think we'll reserve our debate to full council, but just some of the daft comments made now by Councillor Holmes, and I suppose he's got to say that because he's become the leader of the Conservatives, and he feels that's what a leader's got to say. I mean, he's following suit of Councillor Hickson by completely remarks that have no relevance to the real challenges being faced by this city and local government. And on that side, I want to say, we've had some really good, positive conversations with the Liberal Democrats. They're making representations. Don't get me wrong, there are things they're concerned about the budget, and they've made representations. But at least there's an understanding of where this is coming from, where this is being driven from. And that is by ideologically driven cuts from this right-wing Tory government that doesn't believe in public services. So B-Line has been saved for now. We want to save it for the future, make it sustainable, and we've got to find alternative ways of doing that. And can I just say that I just want to commend Voices in Actions, and I know you're a member of Voices in Action. Voices in Action, I just want to pay tribute to the excellent work they've done. They've tended the budget consultation meetings, they've been lobbying the council. The passion and enthusiasm that's come through from young people is really, really inspiring. Because, I need to be inspired. Our cabinet members need to be inspired. We are doing an impossible job at this moment in time, and we've shedded a lot of tears, literally. I probably have one of the hardest jobs any leader of the council has had to undergo, trying to keep motivated councillors with all sorts of experience, all sorts of background that didn't enter local government to put people out of work, to cut services. It's absolutely put us in an impossible position. But what's inspired us is the passion and enthusiasm coming through from young people, because that reminds us, you know, the future is about them. We can't give up. We won't give up for you. And by working together in a productive way, we can find a way through this. So thank you. Okay, any other comments or contributions from anyone? Okay, so Cabinet and I say this with a heavy heart, this is not one, we don't say this to celebrate, it's one of the things I'm asking you to approve a budget which under normal circumstances we would, you know, a set of recommendations, and not approving the budget of course, that comes at the next meeting, I've got the monitor officer who's politely sat there politely. So Cabinet to accept the recommendations, approve the recommendations, then to go forward to full council where we will obviously have the main debate and the main decision will be taken. Okay, so we have scrutiny recommendation. Well, actually, there is no recommendation. It's members. Do they?
Yeah, you've just been reading it out. So members make no further recommendation.
Okay.
So to acknowledge that it's appendix.
Right. Okay. So the Scrutiny and Governance Board members made no further recommendations to Council Cabinet on the General Fund, Revenue Budget 2016-17, 2018-19, in addition to those already included in Appendix 8 of the report, Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board, Budget Consultation, Schedule of Recommendations. Is that okay? Okay, so can I have a show of hands for that recommendation in that report? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. The final item, Contract and Financial Procedures Matters Report. I don't want to go to that. The details are in the report. Happy to accept, take any questions or points for clarity, and the Finance Director will answer any questions. Anything from anyone? Okay, can I have a show of hands from Cabinet to approve those recommendations? Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting, so safe journey home. Thank you.